I have with me Dr. Egosa Ekato, who is a senior lecturer in law at the University of Derby, United Kingdom. Dr. Ekato's main research areas include international environmental law, international trade law, human rights law, and African international legal history. Dr. Ekato has published extensively on his research areas and his academic papers that have been cited by a plethora of public and international agencies, including the United Kingdom Parliament's International Trade Committee and the United Nations Refugee Council. Dr. Ekato is also the chair, Committee on the Teaching of International Law and the SDGs, International Law Association Nigerian Branch, and Senior Fellow, Environmental Law and Sustainable Development, Institute for Oil, Gas, Energy, Environment, and Sustainable Development Institute, Afiba Balola University, Nigeria. Dr. Ekato is the current Deputy Editor-in-Chief, the Journal of Sustainable Development Law and Policy. And of course, Dr. Ekato is also the co-lead of the International Environmental and Human Rights Law Research Cluster, University of Derby Law School. Dr. Ekato is the convener of the Comparative Law Section, Society of Legal Scholars, SLS. Dr. Ekato, it's a delight to have you join us on TMI.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be
Okay,
here.
I mean, from your name, it shows that you're from this state. So, when was the last time you visited Nigeria?
I regularly come to Nigeria for my research purposes. So
Okay.
I'm a regular visitor.
So you are home with all the issues.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Very much so.
Fantastic. Climate change justice is an issue that has been there since the advent of climate change issues, with all the environmental challenges that we're having. And for most environmentalists and analysts, there's a huge concern as to how this affects the Niger Delta area because of the issue of environmental pollution and all of that. Give us your perspectives on how this issue has emerged and the level of response from the international community, international organizations like the United Nations Environmental Program, and all of those institutions.
Thank you very much. I think we need to start from the basics. We need to start from the start. If you look at the evolution of environmental injustices from a Nigerian perspective, you go back to the 50s when the exploration of oil started in Nigeria. Okay. In the 70s and 60s, we didn't have a lot of oil spills, but in the 80s, started having a lot of protests and petitions by the Ogoni people, and you saw when Sarawiwa and the Ogoni crisis. So for a very long time, we could see that some of these multinational corporations, their activities have led to a lot of environmental damage. You have women, children who are suffering from negative impact of environmental damage arising mainly from the activities of these MNCs. I'm not saying all the multinational corporations are involved, but some of them are actually, the activities have led to environmental disasters. And many of these multinational corporations, when they go to the USA, to the UK, similar oil spills do occur in the Western world, but the reaction of these companies are very, very different. And like from a Niger Delta perspective, there's this reluctance by many of these multinational corporations to actually tackle the root causes of this disaster. So there have been a lot of reports done on the negative impacts of, for example, gas flaring. There are many communities in Niger Delta, gas is flared almost 24 hours, and you have women and children living close to that site. And most times, some of these women, they tend to lose their pregnancies, they tend to be medically affected by negative impacts of this environmental injustice arising from these activities. And also, if you also look at in terms of the impact of this oil spill, for example, take a typical Niger Delta village or community. Many of them are fishermen. Many of them are farmers as well. So now the oil spills damages the water. So now you are supposed to have right to food, right to water, right to sanitation, right to environment. So aesthetically, the environment is destroyed. So the fishermen, they don't have access to their fishes. They can't fish. They don't have access to their farms. So in a way, so that damage impact on right to food, right to health, right to housing, because their properties are destroyed. So that is just sort of the evolution of some of these crises. And if you push that to climate change, many of these MNCs, multinational corporations, their activities actually lead to global warming and negative impact on climate change. So the same women and children being impacted negatively by environmental injustice are the same people being impacted negatively by climate injustices.
Okay, how do we hold these organizations accountable in terms of climate change justice? I mean, bringing justice to the people who are vulnerable and mostly impacted by all of these environmental issues?
The answer, there's a multi-pronged answer. The government, the people, myself, yourself, NGOs, we all have a role to play. So first things first, we need to start with the existing legal framework that we have. So now, what is the legal framework for climate change in Nigeria? So up to 2021 November, there was no standalone climate change law in Nigeria. So the last Buhari administration enacted the Climate Change Act in 2021. So now we have a law on climate change. That means that MNCs, public and private companies do have certain statutory duties under that law. Okay. So first things first, lawyers, relevant stakeholders need to be aware of the implications of that law. So how can we use that law as a tool to ensure that the government lives up to its responsibility, MNCs live up to their responsibility? I see the first thing is public awareness, then also what we also call climate consciousness. So now, for lawyers, if you're a lawyer in this era and you are not aware of, let's say, artificial intelligence or technology, you are not a modern day lawyer. So for a lawyer from Nigeria, from Niger Delta, you need to be aware of climate change. What is the impact of climate change on your practice? So you need to be aware. So lawyers need to be abreast of what is happening in terms of climate change. Also, universities as well, you need to teach the students, you need to incorporate environmental education, environmental consciousness into our legal education, be it at the law school, be it at the university. And also, we can use the existing frameworks that we have to ensure that, I'm a fan of improving access to justice. It doesn't mean you are going to get justice. Let people know that there's access to it. So that's what really matters. Even if you go to court and you lose your case, insofar as a fair and fair process, you're not bothered. But when you don't have that opportunity to actually access that opportunity, that court system becomes a crisis. So there has to be extant rule of law. And environmental justice has to be embedded and ingrained into our law. So also, what have the NGOs been doing? I'm doing an event in an edge later today. We'll discuss this further. So what many of these NGOs are doing, they tend to institute cases at the domestic courts. If that is not successful, they go to the sub-regional court at the Air Court of Justice. Also, they also use the African Commission of Human Rights. Also, some of these people from Niger Delta, the Ogoni people, the Bodo people, they have actually instituted cases in the UK, in the Netherlands. So they use a multi-pronged approach. And also, the government also needs to have the political will to enforce these laws. And also, finally, the multinational corporations need to respect the laws of the land and ensure that they respect the rule of law and not use that excuse of saying maybe sometimes they could be sabotaged as a way to say that you're not going to, yes, even though there's sabotage in code, don't you need to cover the wellhead, the oil? You need to have, you have corporate social responsibility. And due to the enactment of the Petroleum Industry Act, CSRO is no longer a voluntary responsibility.
It's compulsory.
It's not a mandatory duty. So the question is, how many lawyers are aware of that new development? Sometimes you read academic papers, we are still stuck pre-PIA. So we need to do more as an academics, do more as lawyers and as a people to ensure that we can...
We have some of these multinational corporations divesting their interest from Nigeria. Isn't that a challenge in the quest for climate change justice against the impact of the activities of these multinational companies?
Yes, yes. As a lot of them, there's this mantra, the move towards low carbon economy, because there's this idea that fossil fuels damages, leads to environmental and climate change issues. So many multinationals are moving towards net zero, low carbon economy, and towards, because of the Paris Agreement as well, it enjoins all states to actually be in the process of moving towards low carbon economy. So the question is, if you're a multinational corporation and you're divested from the oil and gas industry, the question is, what about your legal duty to those people, those that are you going to say because of that you don't have any legal
obligation?
You can divest, it's very good, but that doesn't mean you should not take care of the damage that has occurred. You need to take care of the damage that has occurred and ensure that you protect those people. And also, if you are going to move towards renewables, for example, as a solution or as one of the strategies to tackle climate change, you're going to take land from people. You are going to build the solar. So the question is, if you are going to engage in renewable energy, for example, are we going to repeat the same mistake that occurred in the oil and gas industry? We need to think of just transitions, energy transitions, and access to environmental justice and climate justice.
Fantastic. I know that one of the most robust policy documents on environmental justice is the UNEP report for Ogoni. But in a sense, that report hasn't really produced or provide the necessary impetus for the victims of this environmental pollution. What's your take on this in line with climate change justice?
The report has not been implemented. So that is the first. It has not been implemented, and it's been there for how many years now. So I think there needs to be more political action, political will to actually enforce that report. Because yes, the MNCs came together with the government to do that study, and which shows that the damage to the Ogoni land. So then what next? Up till now, the IDREP was developed, but there's been some form of implementation, but we know that that is not the way to go. We need to restore the environment. But the question is, if the environment is damaged, can you ever restore that environment? Can you ever restore that environment to its pristine value it used to be? So then, what next? Then if we can't do that, we need to give enough compensation to the people. We need to say, okay, yes, we've damaged your environment, we need to pay you well for it. And with that can give them a bit of closure. But the question is, the environment is not being remediated, the environment is not being restored properly, and adequate compensation is not being paid. So it's like a double whammy.
Fantastic. Let me congratulations on your new book, Climate Change Justice in Africa. I believe that's the title of the book.
Yes, it was part of a book I contributed to.
What are the thoughts inside this book, and how can shape the conversation on climate change justice?
Okay, thank you very much. Because I focus on research on environmental justice from global perspective. So in terms of climate litigation, there's this idea that if you are going to engage in climate litigation, it has to be a case that involves climate change issues directly. So that is how it's defined from a Western perspective. So if you use that Western lens, that means there are very few climate litigation cases in Africa and developed. So, but what the idea that we took in this book is that no, you don't do that, because many of the existing environmental justice cases are actually the same. You can actually find climate change issues. And the irony is that the first climate litigation case in the world was actually, the case was here, the Gwemre case. The Gwemre people, that was the first climate litigation case in the world. So, and also we have a case, there's a case that took place in 2021, the Center for Air Pollution and NNPC. Prior to that case, under Nigerian law, the environmental NGOs had no local standard, had no legal standing to institute cases on behalf of victims. And under Nigerian law, right to environment is not justiciable or enforceable. But a lot of us have argued that under the base of the African Charter, People and Human Rights, Article 24, which promotes right to environment, which Nigeria has domesticated the African Charter into its law, that the right to environment is justiciable. So in that case, the Center for Air Pollution case, the Supreme Court said that every individual in Nigeria has the right to protect the environment, that the environment is a public good. So all of us are all stakeholders in the...
So that means environmental issues are not justiciable?
Yes. So they now said that even though right to environment was not before the court, the Supreme Court, the late Justice Wednesday said that on the basis of the Oil Pollution Act, on the basis of the Section 33 of the Nigerian Constitution, on the basis of Article 24 of the African Charter, right to environment can be enforceable. So the question is, what are we doing with that decision? What are activists doing with that? So we need to stretch that further and see how we can use, for example, the provisions of the Climate Change Act, decision in that judgment, the recently enacted Petroleum Industry Act as tools to enforce climate issues in the country.
Dr. Ikhator, thank you so much for your time. I hope to have you here some other time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For the opportunity.
Thank you. It's the TMI on the ITV network. I've been talking with a climate change international lawyer, Dr. Ewusa Ikhator, sharing some very insightful perspectives on the issue. You know, I'm very passionate about environmental issues as it is.